Hi, my name is Darkbreaker, and today I'm reading the second chapter of Smell the Oranges, a fanfiction I read last month and was updated literally the day after I posted my video. Um, and it had two more chapters added. So let's get started. They had propped the door back in its frame, apparently. What else were a bunch of paramedics really supposed to do? It wasn't like they were part time contractors on top of it. Mitchell didn't bother going through the front of his poor little house. He used his keys for the back door and firstly re-emerged via the dining room instead of his lobby. It was quite dark, as all the lamps and the ceiling fan light were turned off. He stared at the fan for a moment before flicking the wall switch, snorting as he waltzed inside. Sadie had to duck through the frame, as she normally did, and she wouldn't take her gaze off her own sandals. She's wearing fucking okay. She appeared meek for someone her size as she deposited her handbag on the table, her thick tail undulating in syrupy arcs behind her. Ew. It normally only did that when she was deep in thought. Mitchell was so fucked right now, though, that he couldn't even begin to fathom what she was thinking about. Personally speaking, he didn't even know what he himself was thinking. That sentence is a mess. The last 36 hours were a blur, and the depth of it all hadn't quite hit him yet. Snorting, again, his nose clogged from the crying in Sadie's car, he walked into the kitchen. The blood puddle was still there. Would it really be? Because wouldn't it be a crime scene? I don't know. We're gonna just assume it's Pokemon World Laws, even though it's like literally like fucking Texas or some shit. Who cares? It was wide enough that three people could lie in it side to side and still have wiggle room. The buxom Charizard started weeping silently in the room behind him. Just give me a few minutes, he mumbled, stepping back into the dining area and pulling a chair out for her. Sadie had her snout in her claws again, so she stumbled to the chair blindly and fell in it with a heavy thwack that saw a noticeable hip ripple even through her. She kept moaning and heaving, shivering as if she was cold. She was supposed to be a heat type, for crying out loud. Ah, yes, my favorite Pokemon type. The heat type. Where was the logic in that? I know, right? Though he supposed induced depression was, at its core, pretty damned cold. Didn't he already have enough reasons to hate himself? Wow, this story just got a whole lot fucking worse. Even destroyed, however, Sadie still got to him. Okay, so he is still human. Her citrus scent was sweltering and strong. I'm pretty sure that's not what sweltering means. Suffering oppressive heat, characterized by oppressive heat. Sultry. Oh. Okay, I guess it is what it can mean. Good on you, author. I guess. Her citrus scent was sweltering and strong, and heat still radiated off her body like she was a living toaster oven. Mitchell had to tear himself from her to go into the bathroom. He picked out a bunch of rags, a mop, some towels, and an army's worth of cleaner before setting to work, obscuring his Charizard's wonderful smell with the oxidized chemical bliss of multi-purpose spray. Blood became like caramel when it started to coagulate and get foul. It became somewhat solid, and it stuck to shit like how boogers would. Ugh. Half the job was scraping. Ugh. The other half was dealing with the noticeable pigmentation it left behind. The center of his kitchen looked like a murder scene, and all he had to battle it were modern-day tidiness implements and time. Lots and lots of time. I called somebody about the door for you, Sadie uttered in the archway to the kitchen, the taller Charizard-S hunching as she dealt with the lower stature of his ceiling. She was playing with her fin piercings, flicking them like they were keys on a chime. Keys on a chime? What the fuck? They should give you a call back on Monday. Thank you. Mitchell tossed the last rag into the little laundry area north of the tile. He sat back and crossed his legs, his eyes darting around the now glistening patch of floor that had been so macabre in its previous decor. I could have helped you. The dragon flicked her rings. I wouldn't have wanted you to. Mitchell looked over his shoulder at her. You didn't have to call for the door either. I could have done that. Not where you were. She smiled, but that turned into a frown a second later. Frankly, it was amazing she possessed even the energy to discuss anything after all that had happened. He supposed that was his fault. Got a genius here. But when you were where he was, as she put it, whenever something horrible happened, you didn't react much to it. Shit tended to stack after a while. He'd prodded death's ass and hollered. That's a new phrase. I don't think I've heard that one before. Emotionally wrecking his friends and family was the least destructive thing in the overall scheme of his personal career. Could he say Sadie was really only a friend? What was she exactly? Acquaintance? Fuck buddy? Probably more of the latter mixed in with a bit of secretary. What? Haven't they been like... didn't he call her girlfriend in the first I don't... How old is this author? Do you think they're 18? Because I don't think they're 18. And if they're 18, then they are clearly a virgin. She didn't need him to tell her that she could do and deserved so much better. There were still bits of wood and screws all over the lobby floor. What the fuck is he referring to when he says lobby? It's a house. The first chapter said it was a house. Does he mean like a foyer or like an entryway, a hallway, a mudroom? What the hell is what is a lobby? No one has a lobby in their house. Whatever. A noticeable drag was made on the carpet, most likely from the edge of the actual door when Sadie had used her inhuman strength to shoulder it off its hinges. He spent a good while picking up the mess and throwing it in a garbage bag. Sadie stood in the arch to the kitchen and watched. If you had actually done it, she said, right as Mitchell was tying up the garbage bag. What would you have accomplished? I don't know. Mitchell shrugged, his face like concrete, perpetually shrugging downwards in an eternal frown. He'd been like that for over 2 years, but it had all really started since the weird half-estrangement he had going on with his own family. I don't know what I can say to you. Oh, it is what it is, right? Sadie offered the most sour-sounding laugh she could muster, and she bit into her knuckles enough to leave bruises, her lower lip quivering up a storm again. You've come to a place where nothing anyone ever does or says is enough for you. And I suppose there isn't a whole lot I can do to change that. Her eyes were glued to the human as he trudged over to the back door again and chucked the quarter-full bag outside. It rapped off the bin, audibly, and crunched onto the patio. He slammed the door shut and didn't bother fixing it. But, anyway, life goes on. Indefatigably. Because that's a word I would use in this situation. I'm fucking emotionally ruined. My boyfriend tried to kill himself, and I'm using the word indefatigably. Makes perfect sense. Sadie wiped a stray tear from her swollen, crimson cheek and sat down at his kitchen table, digging into her purse for what proved to be her phone. It was a little flip phone. One of those shitty LG black nuggets that kids in their high school used to keep in their unbelted pants. Even as an adult, she was pretty old-fashioned. That was probably why, a year ago, when Mitchell had tried to say every horrible thing he could muster to her and tell her to find a better partner, she'd stuck around. Something about a really big appreciation of monogamy. Mitchell never took his Charizard as... See, he just said his I don't understand the rules of this universe. Mitchell never took his Charizard as a diehard Catholic, but then again, neither had Sadie herself. He'd never forget when that little Filipino man at the train platform had thrust a Bible in her face and she had told him to go to hell. "I'm canceling your appointment tomorrow," she said, keys clicking fortuitously on that little pad. She was really precise with those caramel talons of hers. He'd learned that from the tenderness she always had, especially when she used to give him handjobs. She stopped doing that when he jokingly said she was choking the bishop. It probably hadn't been a good idea to say that just a few days after he tried the belt for the first time. On her, or had her use the belt on him? And why would that make her... But then again, sex was trivial in Mitchell's head. Son of a bitch. Why hadn't the knives done it? Look at how much blood he'd lost. The kitchen looked like a kaiju had her period right over the floor. What? Did you hear me? Mitchell coughed and sat in the opposite chair. No, say it again. I'm sorry. I said I'm canceling your appointment. Sadie's amber eyes flickered up for a second without her snout following. She appeared studious over her phone, moving time blocks around in an otherwise busy schedule. Do you remember? You were going to the dentist before you tried to slash yourself open again. Huh. That took balls, even if she didn't have them. That is the worst joke I've read in all the fan fictions I've read so far. That is legit the worst joke so far. I'm sure I'll read worse, but that's going to stay up there, I guarantee it. Normally, comments like that sent her into a tear storm. Sadie looked so miserable in that little kitchen chair, though. She probably didn't have any tears left after today. Her eyes were puffy, and the millions of tiny little velvety scales covering her shielded nothing of the flush. So that's out the window. She doomed the appointment with a few clicks and an apt note to remind herself to call in the morning. I'll set up an estimate with Home Depot for a new door. And we'll give Leo down at the architect's office a ring to see if the wall needs to be replaced too. But I don't think it does. Sadie was talking herself through it every now and again, pausing to wipe away a tear with her thumb, or to let her jaw loosen so it could quiver without inhibition. Mitchell reached over the table and cupped her wrists. Sadie, he croaked. I'll call the university tomorrow, too, and let them know that I am out of action, as the saying goes. That's not how the saying goes. She sniffed and clicked the last key. And I'll let Bridget know that I'm not coming home tonight because of my crazy human boyfriend and his continuous efforts to destroy me. Sadie. Oh, shush, Mitchell. The Charizard brushed his hands away and stuffed her phone back in her purse, staring down at the little handbag with an expression that Mitchell could only understand as one of loathing. She swept a thumb over her eye and clicked her fangs when it came back burnt orange. I would give so much for a day to go by where my makeup actually survives. Did you know that? I haven't seen it. There hasn't been a day where my makeup has died because of soap and water. It's always something before either of those. Because I'm a two-dimensional character with two settings, crying and not crying. I don't even have to be sad, it's just sometimes I'm just crying. Because, either this is a really, really bad hyperbole, or
I just cry for no reason because it doesn't seem like my life has actually been that bad. Besides Mitchell, but yeah.
Mitchell stood up with her and crossed around the table. But the whole thing was a charade. He was half trying to win a race she was deliberately putting in his way. What the fuck does that mean? He had the distinct suspicion that the Charizard felt sick at the idea of him touching her more than he already had.
Does your shower still work?
She zipped up her bag and adjusted her strained shirt. Because that's what we should be thinking about during this part of the story. The boobs on the Charizard. Mitchell could only nod. He felt like a corpse being tugged around on ventriloquist strings.
Just give me 15 minutes and I'll be right back. That'll get you to bed on time.
She sounded like his mother. Or rather, how his mother should have sounded. He mumbled that she didn't need to rush and that she could be in the bathroom as long as she needed. For a second, the facade of her rage was broken, and the Charizardess's face softened. Her brow twitched, and her unbelievably warm and soft paws were caressing his jaw. There were some time... No, there should be a space there. There were sometimes, through all the blackness, that little bits and pieces of the boy she used to know shined through with dominance. But that too faded. Sadie stifled a cry and vanished inside the little one-person bathroom on the other side of the bungalow. He heard the lock click and water start to run. Then this oppressive silence began to gnaw at his belly. We'll use words like indefatigable, but we won't use stomach. Nice. His house felt haunted sometimes, all dark and alone on most nights. Just having a presence wander in its depths was enough to elicit an uncertain swell of anxiety in his breast. Nights like these confused him, as bridges were formed over the immense gap. How could he keep wishing for death if reasons to live kept coming to him and kissing him, even after all that had happened? It was kinda, annoying. -0 -0 -0 -0 -0 They showered separately. It was an oddity that was becoming common. He intermittently went from seating himself on the floor where he had cleaned up all the blood to melting into the couch and watching television. There was nothing on, of course. He left a car show running for a while, marveling at the old models and gleaming paint. Mitchell had always had a thing for cars. He had once been saving money to buy himself a Trans Am Firebird. Most of that cash was still sitting in his account, rotting. He had lost most of his financial concentrations by this point. It didn't pay to follow through with dreams when living wasn't worth it to him. At least, that was most of the time. Mitchell drank some fruit juice from the fridge and glanced over the flank of the sofa. His house phone was on the table. House phone? People still have landlines in 2020? Still and silent, like a forgotten chunk of icy ruin. What? He was half expecting a call from someone. One of his parents, Robert even, or maybe one of the sporadic fair-weather buds apostrophe he kept on the edges of his social life. But no, nobody called. Not even someone from the hospital or a cop or anything. It was like what had happened had just been edited out, like it was a blank space, a void. Mitchell blinked when his bathroom door opened in the back of the house. Soft, fleshy pads on the floor grew in volume until Sadie emerged from the shadowy darkness of the evening interior. She had one of his bath towels wrapped over her enticingly fleshy, draconic body. Even being where he was, Mitchell wasn't going to stop himself from getting an eyeful. Sadie wasn't borderline anorexic like he was, and she had cream-colored boobs that were big enough to weigh down a battleship. The Charizard had her phone in her claw as she trotted over to the couch, rumbling the whole floor of the house when she fell into the cushions right beside him. The neighboring cushion was almost ejected, and him with it. Mitchell had to grab the arm and ride out a literal wave of Poke-Booty force. Now felt like an awfully awkward time to get a boner. But strangely, that didn't feel too out of place either. What had his life been exactly, besides work, feeling horrendous about himself, and getting chumpies from either Sadie when she was feeling easy, or copious folders of internet porn? When life destroyed who you were, it gave you ample ammunition to keep finding the negativity. He supposed he would be considered lucky by many that his ammunition was alive, warm and hot as fuck. At least she wasn't a cold plastic sex toy, or worse, simply his hand.
Bridget's pissed,
The Charizard muttered, tapping away a lengthy text message on her phone. He leaned over, covering his erroneously timed erection, and briefly read through some of the response messages. No, she's being understanding, as usual, he told her.
You don't know Bridget like I do,
Sadie hummed musingly.
Whenever she says, "It's all good, girl," she's about ready to put her tail through a wall or someone's head.
Bridget was Sadie's Salament's roommate down at the university dorms. They probably had yet another research project that needed doing, seeing as the two of them refused to partner with anyone else besides each other for those kinds of things. Stacks of paperwork, all in pursuit of Sadie's dream of becoming a social worker. How was all of that going to work out if he kept up this mess?
We have a paper due soon, and there's a lot of work to do. I'll give her a night off when I get back, just to let her have a break from all this nonsense they keep putting us through. Half the things our professors have us researching don't even feel like they apply to anyone's mental well-being.
Sadie spoke, monotone, not looking up from her phone.
And now I don't even know which direction I'm going. I started all of this because I wanted to work with children. Do you know what our professor said to me? He said,
Your work really derives toward people listening to what you have to say, not talking with you about their problems. Maybe you should reconsider your elective, Sadie.
And really, how can I help it if people are so stupid? If someone doesn't show up to tell them up from down, they wander around like sheep.
She glanced at him.
Sheep don't know what a railroad crossing is. They try to eat the little grass blades right on the tracks, not moving, waiting to die. Sheeple. Bridget joked about it. Sheeple for people. Though I guess I have to give you credit. Most Pokémon are worse.
He didn't realize when the conversation had melded to be about him again. But he couldn't blame her. What else really was there to talk about that was more important? Mitchell didn't say anything and refused to make eye contact with her. He could feel her eyes boring into his forehead, right through his brown hair and then his dense skull. He looked at the towel covering her still somewhat wet flesh. Her tail flame illuminated the whole scene in a damp amber. It accentuated the womanly curvature modeling the Charizard's form with glowing, molten edges. Of course, at that second, little Mitchell chose that moment to twitch. Sadie's eyes immediately fell down to his groin. An expression he couldn't particularly read fell over her features. The dragon snorted, and steam visibly wafted from her nostrils.
What? Mitchell, you want me to fuck you?
She asked, defeated. When he went to speak, she put a talon in his face.
I just showered. Sorry.
The couch creaked, and the bodacious fire-type sauntered back off towards the bedroom. Mitchell shivered as another bout of self-hatred crashed over him. He jolted when a pair of red pajama pants thwacked over his head.
I folded your laundry while I was back there, so you have plenty of unwrinkled pairs of sleep pants ready to go. Honestly, Mitchell, I've been gone for what, a few days? How'd you manage all this in such a short period of time?
Mitchell peeled the sleep pants off his face and bundled them in his lap, shutting down the TV and sulking in the cushions. He couldn't even look at her. Sadie sighed behind him, and he could hear her bladed foot tapping on the hardwood of his living room.
Are you coming, or do I have to carry you out of that, too?
She sneered. Mitchell leapt out of the couch and jogged to the bathroom. If he had a tail, Sadie would have seen it between his legs with the verbal thrashing she had in store for tonight. She wasn't wrong to do so, too. After all, he called her he couldn't imagine it anymore. It made his stomach twist. -0, -0, -0, -0, -0, dash. The shower was empty. But weren't they supposed to be? Most people in the world showered alone consistently, he included. But memories of when he and Sadie were younger were flooding him tonight for some reason. Maybe it was because every time he lashed out at her, he felt like he was ripping and tearing at the only godsend he'd been gifted in his life. It was more than guilt. It was something else. Mitchell tried not to think about it. But then again, his thoughts didn't stray to things much better. Normally, whenever his attempts failed, he would try to view a more positive light in anything. Thoughts revolving around all the progress he'd made, the chances he'd taken, and the rewards he'd reaped. Sociotherapeutic crap like that. Stuff your therapist told you to do alongside breathing exercises shouting "No!" to yourself like a fucking retard. Mitchell hadn't been long of the blessed office of doctoring. Usually people who tried to help made it worse, and folks with degrees in helping amplified that bullshittery. Tonight was just a rock bottom sort of night. Nobody just drained that much blood from their body on purpose and walked away without a twitch. Maybe that was what he couldn't get over. The amount of blood. How did people have that much blood in their bodies? It was just his wrists, for Christ's sake. Did that much blood pump through them all the time? He stared at the stitches in wonder, where his flesh was still purple and discolored around the once ragged welts dealt by the knife. Wait a second. Where was that knife anyhow? It hadn't been in the drawer, on the floor, or in the sink. Curious. Maybe a ghost ate it? Wouldn't have surprised him either way. His life sucked dick. Just like his asshole fag of a brother. He wondered what Rob was doing these days, or who he was doing. Some of the same genes he had to have run down into his alley too. He didn't know Robert well enough to determine for himself, and he knew him better than their father did. The subject of dick sucking inevitably made him antsy again. So, with the knife wound still fresh on his wrist, he jerked off in the shower, thinking about Sadie, who was just a door and half a room away. His face never changed much, even after he fed the drain his load. He didn't really know what people talked about when it came to passion. Had he been a virgin, that probably would have sounded ignorantly naive. He liked that it scared people more, seeing as he wasn't. But hell did he miss it, passionless or not. That Charizard wasn't going anywhere near him after the stunt he'd pulled. And honestly, as someone who had always had too much of a thing for dragons, the thought of his buxom Pokemon never bending over for him again made him consider going for suicide attempt number 2. Well, wouldn't this actually be like 14 or something like that? Because he said at the beginning of the story that he'd tried the belt on the ceiling fan before, which is not... That literally doesn't even make sense as a suicide attempt. Like, how would the belt on the fan work? Anyway, Mitchell growled as he finished bathing, halfway because he was honestly pissed off at himself, and half because of how annoying jizz was to get off once it meshed in with the soap. Fucking mess. Not unlike so much else in his pitiful little existence. He stepped back into the room barefoot later on, with his sleep pants covering his water-cooled skin. Sadie was in his bed. His king-size bed that had barely been big enough for the both of them when Sadie was still staying here most of the time. It had worked because Mitchell had basically been sleeping on her instead of just beside her. His Charizard was like a giant curvy pillow. Narrow-waisted, fat-hipped, big-titted, and orange. And she still smelled like a glass of orange juice, even after using his shower gel. Little Mitchell, unsatisfied, propped up yet again and he found himself crossing the bedroom with a tent in his pants. God damn it.
You think pointing at me with it is going to change my mind or something?
Sadie didn't look up from her phone as Mitchell stood by the side of the bed, his pecker beelining itself in a futile attempt to rip through the linen of his pajamas. When he didn't move, she spared him a sideways glance, her amber eyes narrowing at the hidden lump of his member.
Go to sleep, Mitchell.
When was the last time we fucked anyway? He asked, dry-throated.
Mitchell.
She snarled. He slipped under the blankets and turned away from her without another word. Needless to say, in the coming silence, it was quite a squeeze. His arm and his leg were practically hanging off the side of the bed, and everything behind him was flush against the Charizard's toasty, scaly body. Sadie was like a portable heater, especially when she was inside during the spring and the summer. She radiated a heat that just worked so well with the plush squishiness of the fat distributed in all the right places. One of her boobs was practically rolling down the side of her ribcage like a gelatin bag. He could feel the large, umber-colored nipple pressing on the back of his shoulder. He shifted uncomfortably, grinding his arm against her sensitive region. It was a half accident. Suicidal or not, he still had very straight male urges. Having a colossal dragon tit squashed against him wasn't making sleep come any easier. Sadie shuddered, whether from the contact or the ghostly sigh leaving her fangs, he didn't know. The lamp on her side was the only light in the room on. He fiddled with his stitches as she kept clicking away at her phone, subsisting in the constant and dull ache the wound continued to hammer him with. He'd been strangely numb throughout most of the time since the transfusion. He supposed all the heat from the shower and his Charizard was relaxing his muscles, but he could deal with the agony there. Physical pain was nothing to him.
Mitchell,
Sadie whispered after several minutes. She reached over and put her phone down on the nightstand.
you can't sleep like that.
Wait, how was she even on the bed? Because if she was using her phone, was she like on her back and her tip was falling down to the side onto him? And if so, how did he like half accidentally brush his arm against her sensitive region? That makes no logistical sense. I know, he mumbled. He wasn't going to move unless she said he could, even if it was his own friggin' bed. Authority was the last thing he deserved right now. Sadie's gentle, caramel-clawed hand snaked under his ribs and pulled him through the sheets like he was weightless. The Charizard deposited him on her curvaceous belly, grunting as she scooted and jerked around, trying to spread her tiny wings from behind her shoulders, relieving them of the compact squishing they'd had to deal with. Mitchell hugged her by reaction, wrapping his scrawny arms around the Pokemon's wide hips. His cheek was right against the edge of her ribcage, between her breasts. It was impossible for little Mitchell to be under any semblance of control now. Sadie grumbled when he poked her right in the belly through his sleep pants, giving off a very low volume but drawn-out whining noise. He felt her thick dragon thighs constrict over his hips and lock him into place. Innocently, he peered up at her through the trench of her own cleavage. His arms slid up her sides and clapped onto a boob each, making them jiggle.
You were just waiting for the perfect opportunity, weren't you?
She blew steam through her fangs and glowered down at him. Mitchell simply scooted further up her body and kissed the side of her tit. Sadie gasped, her fin piercings clinking like little door ornaments as she leaned her neck back and touched the headboard.
Has it really been that long?
She asked. Mitchell let his lips slide down her flesh, appearing stymied. He buried his face in her chest and muffled something incomprehensible. It was probably just a confirmation of her own fears.
That's what I thought, anyhow.
She left a lot unspoken there. She probably wanted to ask aloud how she could shower him with so much affection, and he still wanted to end his life. How could she literally help him live, bring him home, and offer her body to him in any kind of way he wanted? and he still wished for... Go to sleep. The Charizard shivered, not out of arousal, but out of loss.
Mitchell?
She looked down and frowned at the messy, brown top of his head. Muffled snores came out from her chest. She supposed just her presence was enough these days. She hadn't slept with him in weeks, so the build-up had to be pretty intense. Wait. Did he... Did he come? Or is she saying that... Like, he's an insomniac? Because people don't typically refer to not getting enough sleep as a buildup of no sleep. They usually talk about, oh, my balls are full. I've been so pent up. I gotta build up a cum. What the, like, and especially intense. Like, what is this story? She picked at his hair and stared holes into the ceiling. A brief flare of her nostrils reminded her that the bungalow stunk, and it was yet another problem she'd invariably have to fix. But those problems could wait until morning. Right now, she needed to worry about how in the hell she planned on falling asleep with so much on her mind. It wasn't every day your lover and best friend tried to off themselves. No. For poor Sadie, at least Mitchell had the decency to wait a few months before he invariably tried again. You couldn't overdo it, lest you risk straining everyone involved, right?
-0 -0 -0 -0 -0 dash. Did I just get blue-balled by a fucking fan fiction about a suicidal dude and his BBW Charizard girlfriend? Subscribe for more garbage. Christ.